I personally believe that all of us are missionaries, but maybe at this point, you will be asking, how can one be a missionary? Well, I would like to introduce to you some very important terms or functions in missions that will help you identify what kind of missionary you are. First is a goer, the one who is being sent to the mission field. This is the one going to the mission field, and usually we think that he is the missionary, the sole missionary, but actually the goer is just one of the missionaries. He is the one being trained and then being sent to the mission field. The training is very crucial, and when you get to the field, it's even harder. The second is the sender, the one who supports the missionaries financially. The third is the intercessor, the one who supports the missionary in prayer, interceding for them unceasingly. Covering them in prayer means a lot, and it's a great ministry. The fourth is a mobilizer, the one who educates believers about missions, stirring up hearts to engage the missions. And I strongly believe that this is my ministry. I am a mobilizer. Even though I consider myself as a mobilizer, of course, we engage into multitasking even in mission. Sometimes or oftentimes, we also go as intercessor. We also go as a sender. And it is my heart's desire to also be a goer. I've been into short-term. I cannot consider it as a short-term mission because short missions is at least 3 years, 3 to 5 years. That's a short-term mission. Perhaps what I have engaged to in the past years are just exposure missions, wherein I'm just being exposed to different cultures. So exposure is different from short-term missions. And then of course long-term missions is at least 10 years. Some would say that long-term missions is at least 20 years. So that's how long it is. So all of this, goer, sender, intercessor, mobilizer, and so forth, this is why I say that we all are missionaries, because whether you are a goer, you are a sender, intercessor, mobilizer, and if I may add, there are also mission care ministers. So whether who you are from these functions, you are considered a missionary. So all of us, as part of the body of Christ, are committed to these missions for the unreached people groups as much as we are committed to the evangelism in the reached people groups. Now, moving forward, let us quickly talk about the fundamentals of intercultural communication, which is very important when you get to the mission field.
The fundamentals of intercultural communication, which will cover 4 topics: involvement, process, meaning is internal and individual, and then what is heard and said. So first, I want us to go through this passage from Philippians 2, verses 5 to 8. And in NIV, it says here, "In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." You will see here that the term contextualization is being amplified in this verse. This sounds like contextualization, and I believe it is contextualization. From the book Ministering Cross-Culturally by Lingenfelter, you will see there that the author said, and I would agree with him, where he said that Jesus is 100% God and 100% man. He is 200% person, so 100% God, 100% man. Jesus took the very nature of man, and it means that he was 100% man. Like any other man, he thirsted, he hungered, he got tired, he sweated out, he wounded, he felt the strong heat of the sun, he got fevered, probably, and all that any human experiences. And yes, he faced temptations too in Matthew 4, if you will remember that. But he never gave in and sinned. That's his difference from all of us. He was sinless until the end because he is God. And he was the holy lamb, the pure sacrifice that was offered to take away the sins of the world. So the point here is that he became man like us to reach us. I remember a beautiful story from Mobimates. This story, I am so glad and blessed to remember this story from her. And it's about God's heart for us, so he can save us from the damnation in hell. So the story goes like this. One day there was a man who was standing anxious. There is a storm, and he was looking outside as he was surrounded by the fiberglass porch. It saddens him when he saw so many birds dropping dead as they hit themselves hard on the surface of the glass. These birds are trying to find shelter, and they thought that they can get inside the man's house. But they didn't know that there is a barrier, and that's the glass. So the man got so emphatic about the situation of the birds, and so he tried a way to save them. He took a flashlight and tried to guide their way to his backyard, where he has a small nipa hut where the birds can probably get or find their temporary shelter until the storm is finished. However, the birds still continued to bump into the glass and die. The man got so upset that the words that came out of his mouth was, "If only I could be a bird like you all are, then I will be able to communicate to you exactly what you have to do, so you will not die." This story is life-changing. Only a bird can talk to a bird 100% accurately, for sure. And looking at this, we realize that only a man can talk to a man 100% accurately. And that's why God became man, so that he can talk to us about the impending danger if we will continue to sin. We have our own languages, and using the same language, communication is 100% effective. That is the reason why God came from heaven to earth, from being king to being a servant, from being God to being a man. He became man so he could reach men. That's it. That has made his word, his message, perfectly understandable. He has provided his instructions to get to heaven in our terms, the man's terms. And we have the Bible to tell us that. So what Jesus did from being God to man is often referred to as incarnation. Please remember that word. And so what he did was incarnational ministry. And this is the example that we are to follow. We also have to do incarnational ministry. Our ministry should be always incarnational. He has set a model for us. We are not to bring our own culture in an area where we want to proclaim the gospel of Christ, but we are to be in that culture, immerse ourselves in that culture, learn and speak the heart language, eat their foods, live their culture, and then preach the gospel according to their own learning styles. Now, doing all this without compromising our faith, of course, or falling into sin, it is what Jesus has demonstrated for us to imitate. So let's go to the 4 fundamentals. Let's start with the first, the involvement. By involvement, you discover commonalities. Involvement is sharing something in common. Communication becomes more effective in a what kind of environment? In a homophilous environment. Commonalities is a great entry point to establish relationship. So the root word for communication is communis, and common is formed from the same root, common, communis. So hence, without common things, communication becomes weak. I'm saying this for the nth time, if you will realize that. So communication establishes commonness. Without talking to each other, you will never discover anything. So you need to talk. But always remember to limit the talking. I always say you can share, you can preach even without talking. Communication, it's a two-way process. You learn from the person and the other learns from you. It's very important to get involved with others to discover commonalities, and by taking such discoveries, you will be able to plan out your next move in the evangelism. Make sure that you do not do this with many or with any compromise to your faith, and even losing the soul by intimidating them because of foul actions that will make you look like you are intruding their lives. That's why I said less talking, as much as possible. Just enough to balance everything. This is proper way of getting involved in others' lives. You should know your limitations. I want you to think about this. When do your limits come in terms of involvement with other people's lives? I think this is just a rhetorical question, and maybe you cannot answer, but think about it. This picture, we are the living Bible. Remember, you may be the only Bible that others read. The best medium for the message of Christ is people. We are the medium of Christ's message. As I said earlier, you can preach without talking. Our lives are the Bibles that most people around us are reading. This is the Bible that they are reading. And so always make sure that your lifestyle, the way you talk, the way you act, the person that you're presenting outside to people is the Bible that they are reading. So always make sure that you are being a good witness to the gospel, to the people outside. The church father Augustine said, preach the gospel at all times, use words if necessary. So even the church fathers would agree that we are not to preach with a lot of words, but preach with our actions. Our lives should speak about the gospel. For us to get involved with the people and communicate the gospel in their terms, what we have to do is to know them more. So, know your audience, study them, learn their needs and interests, learn their ways of expressing their concerns, rephrase the message, or find the key for understanding. Don't just transmit, involve yourself. Find common interests. Be willing to identify with them. I can remember how Jesus ate with the tax collectors. He was willing to be identified with them, but of course, without compromising who he was and his righteousness. He was there to influence, not to be influenced. And that's the example that we are to follow. Again, what we are to do is to be cautious. We have to learn the taboos and make sure that we get rid of them. The taboos. What is not right in their culture, for us not to offend them. And then, of course, learn the language. This is very basic and crucial. If you're a missionary or you desire to be a missionary, you have a calling to be a missionary, the first thing that you are to do is to learn the language. Your first year should be invested solely to learning the language. Language is part of the total cultural learning. You have to understand culture through language. Learning the language may take time. It depends actually on the language. Some languages are easy to learn, while some are very hard. Learning, for some it may take a few months, while others need years to master the language. It also depends on the difficulty of the language and what your heart language is. For example, I'm a Filipino. We have our Filipino alphabet, which is somehow close to English alphabet, and even some of the alphabets in the Malay race, like Malaysia and Indonesia. Therefore, it will be somehow easier for me to learn Bahasa Malaysia or Bahasa Indonesia. On the other note, it may be hard for me to learn other languages like Thai, Burmese, Khmer, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, and so forth. Because these have very unique letters, alphabets, characters. I remember learning the Khmer language, the Cambodian language. It's very hard. Their alphabet is composed of 33 consonants and 23 vowels, if I remember it right. And then aside from that, they have 11 inherent vowels. So how are you going to memorize all these letters? The Greek language is a bit easier because it's almost like the English alphabet. It's just the verbs and the rules are the ones that make it very difficult. I have a missionary friend who is a fellow Filipino. When he went to Indonesia, it only took him a month of extensive language learning to be able to do conversational level Bahasa. He can go out the street and talk to people good enough to be understood and understand the people around him. This is because Filipino and Bahasa are considered family languages. I am thrilled to know that some Bahasa words are the same with some Filipino words, and some are the same with some words from local dialects. For example, is anak, which means son or daughter. Mata is eye. Talinga, it's the ear. The kulit, it's a Bicol word. Talinga and kulit are both Bicol terms, and kulit is skin, and so forth. We're to share our experiences. Language leads to shared experiences through special events. It increases commonality. So do rather than talk. Some parts of our stories can be similar to what they are getting through, no matter the racial difference would be. For example, is your experiences with family or with romantic relationships. These things are universal, and they will be very interested to know your story and take the opportunity to capture their interest when that happens. You are to participate also in the culture aside from learning the language. You are to learn culture patterns. As you learn, never criticize their culture. There is beauty. Always remember there is beauty in every culture, and it is your goal to dig deeper and appreciate such beauty. Try your best to understand their culture and see patterns that you can use in strategizing your entry for the gospel. Another thing is involvement. That means participation. You participate in the culture. At first, of course, your role is to be an observer. You look from a distance as you understand them. And your next step is to get in the culture, mingle and participate without compromising your faith. If you're asking me how not to compromise the faith, I'd say you'll know when you get there. Yeah, it's often the thing, you cross the bridge when you get there. It's like what we talked about Paul when he was in Athens and he was talking about the unknown God, right? So it is important that you can anticipate what would happen if you get inside their culture. Hence, during your observation, you should be wisely doing that assessment already. Also, you must be willing to make mistakes, but try. Yes, you should anticipate errors, but do your best to minimize them. Always think first before you talk and do actions. Also, you are to participate in daily routines. Making your participation to the culture daily will help you master your new role, and it will be easier for you to identify with them. So, participation in events show the difference in cultural thinking. Some festivals or holidays would be great for you to participate in. But again, remember not to compromise your faith and know where you give your allegiance to.